Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Motes. On today's episode, we jump forward to the later part of the New Republic era. The Empire is dying, but as Admiral Pellaeon sets off to negotiate the Remnant's surrender, Moff Disra launches a plan to pit the members of the New Republic against each other in civil war. Meanwhile, Luke and Mara Jade search for a pirate group using clone troops left over from the Thrawn crisis more than a decade earlier. It's Specter of the Past by Timothy Zahn. And joining me to talk about the book are Crystal and Thomas from the TK331 podcast. How are you two doing today?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thomas, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for having us on today.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming on and helping me with this. Now, if folks have not heard the TK331 podcast, why don't you tell folks what they could expect?
We do kind of the same thing Aaron does. We have been moving chronologically through Legends / the EU. We started around Truce of Bakura. We've had some deviations, but nothing significant. And now we're moving into the Young Jedi Knights series.
Yeah, we've got our next episode is Heirs of the Force will come out in early August.
So you're getting to the later 90s at this point.
Well, technically, we've done a few books in the 2000s. We did the Kenobi novelization when the Obi-Wan Kenobi show came out. And we've done, we actually just did Survivor's Quest pretty recently, which are you going to get to next month. That just recently came out for us.
Yeah. So we have, but largely we're moving, we're getting there. We're getting towards the end of the 90s. It'll end eventually.
Well, I can't wait to talk with you two more about today's book. But first, it's listener question time. Today's email comes from Sable, who sent in a bunch of questions, so I combined a few of them for us to answer. First question. If Garrus Shrike was still alive, would he still be hunting Han Solo, and how would Leia and Luke react if they learned about Han's past with Shrike, Elysia, and Bria Theron? Crystal, what are your thoughts?
I think Shrike would hunt Han to a point. Like, to me, we don't know him super well. He appears in flashbacks in that first book of the Han Solo trilogy, but we don't know him super well. It's just that, to me, my impression of him was always that he'll go for an easier target with a bigger score associated, and at a certain point, Han stops being an easy target. So at a certain point, the payout's not going to be worth it for all the risk that he's going to take. So I think by the time Han's like a big name with the rebellion, it's maybe not worth it to him if he was still alive.
I think I mostly agree with that. I do think that if the opportunity presented itself, he would still strike at Han.
Yeah.
So like when Han and the family visited Corellia in the Corellian trilogy, I could see him trying to use that to his advantage. Yeah. So I think he would wait for the opportune moment, as he did at the end of Paradise Snare.
I think I mostly agree with Crystal's opinion, at least through the events of the original trilogy and then up to when Leia becomes such an important figure in the New Republic government. By then, Han is the husband of either the second in command when Mon Mothma is chief of state or when Leia herself is chief of state. So I don't really know what type of opportunity Garrus Shrike would have at that point in time. Now, Thomas, you make a good point there at the Corellian trilogy, which I haven't covered yet on my show, but by that point in time, maybe, because Han is kind of cut off from the rest of his family through most of those books. So if an opportunity does present itself, then sure, I'm sure Shrike would probably take a shot. And then as far as the second part of Sable's question here, one of the things you learn when you become an adult is everyone has baggage. Everyone has a past.
Yes.
I think probably for the most part, Leia at least knows a good amount of Han's past. There probably has been some discussions about when he was a smuggler, about maybe a handful of the women he had relationships with. I'm sure Han hasn't told Leia some of the worst things he's done, like if he has killed somebody or whatever. But as I said, people have a past. It's just what are you willing to, I guess, put up with in order to have a relationship with whoever you want to have a relationship with.
I think for me, Leia and Luke, for the most part, would be really proud of what Han did on Elysia. Like, he was just trying to find a piloting job to survive and get away from Shrike, and he ended up, saving slaves there in the end. And it didn't work out for Han for the best in the end, of course, by the end of that trilogy. But I think both of them would be really proud of the steps he took to become the man they eventually know him to be. So I think they'd be proud of what he did while he was there.
Yeah, I think Leia would give him a hard time, but not a hard time about like, oh, I knew you were just a softie on the inside. Like, this proves it all the way back to when you were a young man, like before, like even though you had been through all of this horrible stuff, you still tried. You saw this woman who was in this terrible situation, and you felt strongly enough that she should be free. Like, I think that Leia would appreciate that. And Bria's not a threat to her. Bria's dead. Not that it has to be like that, but...
On that note, second question from Sable. What would Jaina, Jason, and Anakin think if they learned that their dad kidnapped their mom to try to make her fall in love with him? That is a very good question.
I feel like at some point it's briefly mentioned to the kids somewhere in the EU, but I cannot remember where or what their response is.
I just assumed that like they never have an on-page conversation with their children about like, listen, here is what happened. Everybody was just kind of out of their minds for a few days. This is not the way anyone normally behaves.
They call it the Wolverton sickness.
Yeah, everybody had a virus, a terrible Wolverton virus.
Your father held a gun at me.
Pull the trigger.
Pulled the trigger.
Yeah. There's surveillance footage of us, him walking me away onto the Falcon. Like,
I do think actually what comes in the future, like Tenel Ka must know. And if Tenel Ka knows, at some point she's going to tell Jason and Jaina if they don't.
but it might just never come up. Like, she might just assume that they already know.
Do you think Isolde tells Tenel Ka?
No, I think her grandmother tells her. Because they're the exact kind of thing that she would do with how manipulative she is.
Yeah, that's possible.
Her Hape's grandmother?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like if the kids really like knew, it would just like change their opinion of Han forever. And I think it would affect Jaina the most because she seems to have this like connection with Han over like the mechanical stuff, the ship stuff.
Yeah.
If I found out something about like that about my father, I would be like, I'm never speaking to you again. This is unacceptable.
True. However, I do also think it depends upon how Leia sort of enters the conversation. Like,
that is true.
If she sort of laughs it off as, like you said, a wacky escapade they had back when they were young, maybe they don't take it quite as badly.
And
it's possible, yeah.
And also, like, if they present it like, she was being forced into a choice she didn't want to have to make between not just Han and Isildur, but Han and the Republic, essentially, because of what the Hape cluster would bring to the New Republic with all, 63 planets or something. So because she was in that situation and had to make a terrible choice, and the fact that I don't think she wanted to make that choice.
Yeah. There were a lot of factors. There was a lot of nuance. I almost hesitate to say, but
Tried for nuance.
there was an attempt at nuance for sure.
One thing's for sure, we have to get that dinner conversation somewhere. So someone's got, maybe it's a fanfic, but someone let me know where that dinner conversation took place.
Somewhere in a fanzine in the 90s, there's a piece of fan fiction
Absolutely.
that covers it.
Thank you very much for the questions, Sable. And listener, if you have a question you'd like to ask me, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, just record a short message and email it in, but please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time for today's book, Specter of the Past by Timothy Zahn, the first book in the Hand of Thrawn duology. Crystal, Thomas, are you guys ready?
So ready.
Let's do it.
Grab yourselves a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge.
The story begins on the Chimera. Admiral Gilad Pellaeon oversees a test of the latest Imperial weapon, a prototype cloaking shield that would allow a ship to fire on an enemy while in hiding. It's a weapon that could stop the Remnant's decline and give the Imperials hope to fight the New Republic. But the test fails. Imperial scientists are still years away from a working prototype. It's the final straw for Pellaeon. He knows the Empire is dead. The only hope now is to keep the systems that the Remnant still controls. Reluctantly, the Admiral calls for the Imperial Moffs to meet with him on Bastion to discuss the terms of their surrender to the New Republic.
Han and Luke travel to the planet Ithagan. New Republic President Ponk Gavrisum wanted Leia to mediate a shipping dispute between the Ashori and the Diamala, but Han wants Leia to rest on Wayland with their children. The squabble between the Ashori and Diamala is the latest of a bunch of local disputes to rise up as the New Republic has taken a more hands-off view of controlling individual systems than what the Empire did. Han and Luke intercept a pirate cruiser trying to disrupt negotiations when Luke experiences a strange force vision, one of Palpatine and Exar Kun staring out from the darkness, laughing at him. The vision leaves Luke feeling cold. What was the Force trying to tell him? But Luke doesn't have time to think about that now, because he gets another weird feeling from the pirate cruisers. It's the same feeling he experienced during the crisis with Grand Admiral Thrawn 14 years earlier. Clones.
On Wayland, Leia and her children enjoy their vacation at the base of Mount Tantus. But the fun is cut short when Leia's Nogri bodyguards catch a thief named Lakjeet in the Emperor's old storehouse. Lakjeet took a set of data cards, claiming he was working for Talon Card. But Card and Mara Jade say they never sent the Deveronian to Wayland. Leia looks through the cards and finds one that will send shockwaves through the New Republic government. Proof that the Bothans were involved in the Imperial destruction of the planet Kaemas. And there's one other data card with something odd on it. Something called the Hand of Thrawn. Mara says she's never heard of the Hand of Thrawn, but if it was some sort of contingency plan of Thrawn's, the New Republic better prepare for the worst.
Pellaeon lays out the situation to the Moffs. If the Imperial Remnant doesn't surrender, the New Republic will wipe them out. Maybe not today, but soon. Pellaeon receives a surprising vote of support from Moff Disra, one of the most powerful Imperial leaders remaining. With Disra on his side, Pellaeon receives enough support to contact General Garm Bel Iblis. When Pellaeon leaves, Disra enlists a former Imperial guardsman in a secret plan to attack the New Republic. Disra can handle the politics, but he needs a military strategist to handle battle strategies, and Major Tierce fits that bill. In addition, Disra has another secret. He's found someone to be the face of his plan. When Disra brings Tierce into his office, the former guardsman sees a familiar face sitting behind his desk, Grand Admiral Thrawn. Immediately, Tierce snaps to attention. But he's also confused. Tierce was there when Thrawn was killed. It turns out the chiss sitting before him is not Grand Admiral Thrawn. He's a con man named Flim, who Disra found and paid to surgically look like Thrawn. Disra says with his political clout, Tierce's tactical mind, and Flim's presence, they can bring Grand Admiral Thrawn back to lead the Imperial Remnant to destroy the New Republic.
On Coruscant, Leia and President Gaverson meet with Bothan Senator Borsk Phalia. The three look over the Kemasi documents, but the data card is damaged. It won't show the names of the Bothans who sabotaged the Camus planetary shield and allowed the Empire to bombard the surface, starting the firestorm that destroyed the world's ecosystems and wiped out all life. Phalia says the ruling clans have never been able to find out who the culprits were, but Gaverson wants access to all the information the Bothans have about Camus. He asks Leia to go to Bothawi and orders Phalia to grant her access to all the documents the ruling families have pertaining to the investigation.
Luke tracks the pirates back and infiltrates their lair, searching for the clones he felt back at Iphigenia. But since his vision, Luke seems reluctant to use the Force as much as he normally does. He's holding back, worried that the more powerful he becomes, the greater chance he could fall to the dark side. Luke slips deep into the pirate's base. Just as he begins to sense the clones, he gets captured. Luckily for him, or maybe it's the will of the Force, but a few days later, Mara shows up and rescues him. As they leave the system, Mara spots a strange-looking fighter, watching everything. It kind of resembles a TIE fighter, but with a bunch of fingers spreading out from the ball cockpit. Luke heads back to Coruscant to warn the New Republic about the clones, while Mara decides to follow the starfighter as it jumps farther into wild space.
The smuggler chief Mazik meets with Lockjeet on the planet Trogan. Mazik is protected by a former member of the Mistral Shadow Guard, a woman named Shada Dukal. While Shada keeps an eye on Mazik from the rooftop of a building overseeing the meeting, she's confronted by another former Mistral and Shada's friend, Carolee Doolin. Carolee says she's been sent by the 11 Elders to bring Shada home, but Shada refuses and knocks out her friend. It marks the end of Shada's time with the Mistral. When Mazik's meeting ends, Shada leaves the smugglers' organization. She decides to go to Coruscant and to offer her services to Leia Organa Solo and the New Republic.
Paleon arrives on Yaga Minor on his tour of the Imperial Remnant. He tells one of his commanders, General Hestev, about his plans to surrender. Paleon tells Hestev about Moff Disra's support for his plan, but he doesn't trust Disra. The Admiral asks Hestev to look through the Imperial records on Yaga Minor, and the General finds evidence that several Imperial leaders have been embezzling the Remnant's funds, including Disra. Hestev also mentions that Disra's assistant, Major Tierce, was on Yaga Minor recently. Immediately, Paleon suspects Tierce was there to dig through some of the Emperor's secret files for Disra. He orders Hestev to find out which files Tierce tried to access, but Paleon can't stay to help. It's time for the Admiral to parley with General Bellibliss.
On Bothawi, Leia and Han start their investigation into whether or not the Bothang ruling families know the contents of the Kayamasi document. But quickly, their search is interrupted by a mob of people outside of the combined clans' building. The mob demands justice for Kayamas and reparations for the surviving Kayamasi. Han steps out on a balcony overlooking the area where the mob is gathered. Just then, some sort of canister shoots into the wall beside him. Someone fires a blaster a moment later. The bolt hits the canister beside Han and reflects back into the crowd, hitting two people. Han is stunned. Someone points up to the balcony. He shot them. It was him. Han runs back into the building and gathers up Leia and 3PO. They flee to the spaceport and lift off, heading back to Coruscant.
Mara follows the strange fighter to the planet Nirawan. She decides to head down to the planet alone, taking a shuttle and following the fighter into the atmosphere. She spots a massive ravine, and at the end, a huge fortress made of some sort of black stone. As Mara searches for a place to land, she's spotted by a pair of the fighters. She dives into the ravine, dodging left and right, trying to evade her pursuers. She zips around a bend and spots a cave large enough to hide her ship. Mara lands and hides, escaping the chasing fighters. Later, Mara heads into the cave, trying to find a way up to the fortress. She hears a voice, then another, and another. But no, Mara realizes she's not hearing the voices. It's coming through the Force. She starts to look around when she hears wings flapping, hundreds of wings. Mara turns to flee, but slips. She hits her head and falls unconscious.
Back on Bothawi, Lando Calrissian finds Diamal and Senator Miatamia stuck at the spaceport. Miya opposes the call for Bothans to make reparations to the Kayamasi. Protesters have surrounded the senator's shuttle, cutting off his access to the ship. Lando offers to give Miya a ride if he'll consider a business proposal to protect Lando's mining shipments. The senator agrees, but as the Lady Luck heads to Coruscant, it's pulled up hyperspace by Grand Admiral Thrawn. His appearance shocks Lando. It can't be. Thrawn is dead. But the Grand Admiral says he's indeed alive, and now that he's healed from nearly being killed 14 years ago, he's decided to come out of hiding. Thrawn offers to help Miya learn the names of the Bothans in the Kayamasi document.
On Coruscant, Leia and Han meet with Karrde and Lando. The rumor that Grand Admiral Thrawn is back is spreading through the Senate. Some systems have begun speaking about leaving the New Republic and rejoining the Empire. If only we could find an undamaged, authentic version of the Kayamasi document, Leia says. Lando says Karrde may know where one is. There's a retired smuggler and information broker named George Cardass, who might know where to find one. And the kicker? Cardass was Karrde's mentor. Leia starts to question Karrde when Shada Dukal breaks into the room. The woman offers to work for Leia as a spy, a bodyguard, an assassin, anything. Shada overheard Lando and Karrde talking about George Cardass. So, Leia says she'll accept her services. She can join Karrde as he goes to ask Cardass for a copy of the Kayamasi document.
When Luke learns about Mara's mission to Nirawan, he immediately heads out to rescue her. Karrde suggests that Luke take Mara's personal yacht, the Jade's Fire. He says Luke can dock his X-Wing in the Fire's cargo hold. When Luke arrives in the system, Karrde says he can leave the Jade's Fire in high orbit, use his X-Wing to fly down to the planet to save Mara, and then the two can return and escape in the Fire. Luke agrees to Karrde's plan and readies to go. But before he leaves, Luke tells Karrde that he's had a disturbing vision of Mara floating face down in water, and she looks dead.
The story ends with Pellaeon arriving in the Palpatine system for his meeting with Garm Bilobliss. The general hasn't arrived yet. Pellaeon is willing to wait a while, but the admiral is a little worried. He hasn't heard anything from the courier he sent to find Bilobliss and invite the general to Palpatine. As Pellaeon settles in to wait for Bilobliss, a small task force of warships emerges from hyperspace, weapons powered up. The ships bear the markings of the Corellian Defense Force. I guess Bilobliss rejected your offer, Captain Ardif tells the admiral. Maybe, Pellaeon says, maybe not. Pellaeon orders his fires to fly straight at the battlecruisers in a straight line. Just before the fires reach the Corellian warships, Pellaeon orders the Chimera to fire torpedoes directly at the Imperial fighters. Immediately, the fires spread out, and the torpedoes slam into the enemy ships. They do terrible damage, forcing the Corellians to turn and jump to hyperspace. In the aftermath of the battle, Pellaeon tells Ardif that he doesn't know who was on the ships, but it wasn't Garm Bilobliss. If it was, the general will have recognized the Imperials using his own tactics against him. Pellaeon says it's time to wait. Hopefully, they won't be waiting for long.
Time to take a break. When we return, we'll talk more about Specter of the Past by Timothy Zahn. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me take a moment and recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Thrawn Treason focuses on the future Grand Admiral learning to navigate the politics of the Imperial military. But when Eli Vanto brings him a warning from the unknown regions, Thrawn must decide whether to return to the Chiss Ascendancy or remain loyal to the Emperor. It's Thrawn Treason by Timothy Zahn. The conclusion to the Star Wars The Imperial trilogy. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats, and today I'm joined by Crystal and Thomas from the TK331 podcast. And we're talking about the book Specter of the Past by Timothy Zahn, the first book in the Hand of Thrawn duology. This is a book that you guys have already covered on your show back in 2024. What are some of your overall thoughts? Crystal?
I am a big plot reader. Like one of my reading doorways or pathways, whatever you want to call it, is I love a book that's really plotty where you have to be trying to figure out what is going to happen. So the first time I read through this book, it was kind of a blast because there are so many like building blocks, there are so many pieces to start trying to put together. Even the second time through, it's nice to sort of like see little things that I missed the first time through, not knowing what was coming. So for that reason and from that perspective, I really liked this book. From a different perspective, my big hang up is Flim as Thrawn because I wanted to be more tricked. I wanted to be in the dark with the New Republic, basically. It's fun to see what they're doing behind the scenes on the baddies side, like, don't get me wrong, but I've always liked a more limited, like, paring down of that in stories that I read.
Tom?
So I've said this on our podcast, I've said this on your podcast. Timothy Zahn is my favorite Star Wars author. And pretty much every Star Wars fan, certainly every Star Wars EU fan, has read the original Thrawn trilogy. It's in some ways almost our Bible, if you will. Like, everyone has read it. Everyone knows the story of it. But I feel like a lot of people don't talk about the Hand of Thrawn duology. I don't think it's as good as the original Thrawn trilogy, but I think both these books, and I respect to the past, I think it's a great book. I do think it's, at times, a little overlong, but I think Zahn he gets these characters so well. He has really intricate plots that are fascinating to follow. Not everything he does works 100% of the time, but it works enough of the time to make me love pretty much every Star Wars book he has ever written. And I really wish that more people would talk about these two books when talking about Zahn's work in Star Wars, because I don't think enough people do.
Yeah, I would say that Zahn is one of my favorite authors in Star Wars. There are little things that every author does, that won't work for people. And Zahn does have a few quirks for me that don't work some of the times. I think his best books in Star Wars generally are the ones that lean more science fiction on the science fiction / fantasy scale. And occasionally I'm not sure that works as well in Star Wars because I think overall Lucas saw it more as a fantasy style tale than a science fiction tale.
Space fantasy.
Exactly. But as far as this book goes, I enjoyed it. As you said, one of the best things that Zahn does in his writing is write plot. Occasionally, I think there's too much plot in some of his books.
Yes.
But I think the Hand of Thrawn duology is two of his better books. I agree with you, Thomas. The original Thrawn trilogy is my favorite of Zahn's writings in Legends. I would say Specter of the Past and then the next book, Vision of the Future, are a little bit of a step down, but I do like them more than some of the later writings in Legends that Zahn has.
There was one thing in particular in this book, Aaron, that really made me think of you because we've talked about it before. The feeling that everybody just happens to be in the same place at the right moment, especially when Luke runs into Card. Like the fact that, I just happen to have run into Card and I just happen to now know that Mara is missing and I just happen to have the ability to go get her. I know he had a Force vision. It's a little bit too much happenstance for me.
Sure. I think, that is one thing about Zahn that I think keeps popping up in each of his Star Wars Legends stories. I admit I've never read a thing of Zahn's outside of Star Wars, so I don't know if he does this in his other books. But in Star Wars Legends, there is always, for some reason, some coincidence, quote unquote, where every different party that he needs to be in a certain spot at exactly the same time ends up in that spot at exactly the same time. And a few of those times, I don't believe that would happen.
I've read a few of Zahn's other works, the Conqueror's trilogy and one other thing, but I have read them 6-7 years ago, so I don't remember super well if that still happened there or not. I remember really liking the books though, and those were also more sci-fi heavy than fantasy heavy from what I can recall, because that's kind of in a lot of ways his bread and butter.
Right. So as far as this book goes, let's get into some of the specifics. At the beginning, Admiral Pelion decides that the Imperial remnant has had enough. Sooner or later, the New Republic is going to defeat whatever the remnant is at this point in time fully. Whether it's just going in eventually and wiping them out, or most likely attrition, slowly wearing the remnant away, and maybe in another 2 decades, the remnant is completely gone. I remember reading this for the first time, and for me, this was a revolutionary idea that anyone in the Empire would willingly discuss surrender, let alone formulate a plan for surrender. What did you two think when you first read Pelion's thought process and the proposal he gives to the Moffs in this book?
To me, it sounded like he was talking so much sense. I thought to myself, this is the most practical Imperial that I have ever encountered in my entire life.
Which is why this was a revolutionary thing.
Yeah, exactly. Tom always says that Pelion is his favorite Imperial. This book was the first time I really understood why. I think because he has enough understanding of this whole situation to not be so blinded by a kind of patriotism to the Empire, to know that, hey, if we want to hang on to anything that we have in the long term, we have to stop now. We have to negotiate now. He's not one of those Imperials who is of the mindset of we either get everything or we die. And he's also not one of those who's of the mindset of we must succeed. There's no other possibility. Of course, the Empire is going to succeed. I mean, he has seen over his career this long, painful erosion of everything that the Empire was. It's hard for me to think that there's literally no one else who came to that conclusion, because it seems so logical to me. But Imperials are a special breed.
They are. I think others did come to that conclusion, but the difference is none one else in power came to that conclusion because of the way the Empire...
the Moffs in that room.
Oh, yeah.
They do not want to do it.
The way the Empire is structured and the way just fascism just so often works is it brings up the worst of the worst to the very top, which is why Pelion being in charge is such a unique thing for him, because no one else is really like him in the Empire, at least who have risen in power. And it's because, as we've seen throughout things like the original Thrawn trilogy, the Chronicles, and other stories, we've seen him kind of rise up to the very top because he was the one who was kind of sort of reasonable. He and Dala killed all of the other Moffs back in Darksaber, in one of my favorite moments ever that Anderson wrote. And he just kind of... She takes over after... Pelion takes over after Dala fails, and he's just a surprisingly reasonable person, which is a weird thing to say about the head of a fascist empire, at least the military part of it. But
I think the military part of it is the key.
Yeah.
That him studying actual strategy and tactics with and without Thrawn, and knowing what's possible and what's not practically.
And I think there's a reason why Thrawn chose Pelion when he came back from the unknown regions.
Yeah.
And that's kind of discussed, especially in the next book, of when Pelion hears about Thrawn's why didn't he come to me? Well, because this is not actually Thrawn's why he didn't come to you. But why did Thrawn come to you in the first place, Pelion? Is because you are actually such a unique individual within the Empire and someone who actually can see the bigger picture and what's more important.
And the exact opposite of Pelion's pragmatism is this scheme that Moff Disfra concocts with a con man that he has surgically altered to look like Grand Admiral Thrawn, and a former Imperial Guardsman that he knows is a smart military tactician, and he believes that the three of them together can somehow really attack the New Republic. I don't think, obviously he doesn't think that they can attack them directly because they're so much smaller now, but can help exacerbate this Kaamasi, however you pronounce it, document situation, and maybe make the New Republic fall apart from within. And like you said, Crystal, Disra is the exact opposite of Pelion. He still believes that the Empire, of course, under him, Disra, can somehow become the ruling faction again in the galaxy.
It's just unacceptable in the minds of these people that another entity would exist like the New Republic, that it does not fall under them. That somewhere someone is living their life away from the Empire, and surely that makes their life worse because it's a different life than what the Empire sees as ideal. But in terms of whether or not their plan could work, I feel like it's the only plan that had the possibility of working given where the Empire is at. And I still feel that regardless of the Kamasi document, etc., in the end, I don't think there was any alternate reality where it would work, even if it was the one that had the most possibility of working.
Yeah, I think they could have worked. The plan could have worked to fracture the Republic to the point where it's literally fractured into multiple government entities throughout the galaxy,
or where it's at least more vulnerable.
Right, but I don't think it could ever work to bring to the point where the Empire could reassert itself.
I mean, we're talking like they talk hard numbers in this book about like how many Star Destroyers they have left, how many systems they have left compared to what they used to have. They simply, like, you don't have the numbers. You just don't.
And they're not going to be able to successfully wage guerrilla warfare. It's just not how they operate.
Yeah.
Thomas, now that we have Admiral Pelion back in canon, do you think we'll see some aspects of this pragmatism in his portrayal eventually?
God, I hope so. Like it was what, 2 seconds in season 3 of Mandalorian. There was a brief bit of his voice at the end of Rebels, and I think that's all we've seen, because I don't think he's been in any of the Thrawn books yet.
And I don't think he.
I believe
made
he's
any
been
appearance
mentioned
in
in one of. I think he was mentioned in one of the Thrawn books.
Okay, so I really hope so, because he is, like I said, like Crystal said, he is my favorite Imperial character because he's just so different and so much more nuanced and understanding. And I worry, because we know where the story of the Empire goes leading into the First Order. We're not going to get to see that nuance, but I'm hoping we get to see something of that in Ahsoka season 2.
I don't think we're gonna get it. I think they took all of the possibility of Pelion's development and they put it into Eli Vanto instead.
And I do love Eli; he is great too.
I don't want to go off in too much of a tangent here on the Legends show, but for the most part, what we know of Eli is he's now in the unknown regions with the Chiss. As far as in the galaxy far, far away, at the end of Ahsoka, we have Thrawn coming back in the Chimera, and we have Pelion as part of this Shadow Council, I guess, of Imperials. He was there at the end, like you said, of season 3 of The Mandalorian. So I could maybe see in this New Republic, heir to the Empire, whatever you want to call it, movie that is supposedly coming sometime around 2029 or 2030, Thrawn and Pelion reuniting on the Chimera.
I really hope that happens, and maybe, like, because we know Thrawn has to be defeated. Maybe it's after Thrawn's defeat we'll see Pelion, surrender the Shadow Council. We'll kind of see this idea play out under Disney, but we'll see.
Right.
It's so hard for me to place Thrawn and Pelion in that stretch of time between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. To me, it just feels like the First Order eclipses so much. It's weird that Thrawn would not be mentioned in that like history looking back. I understand that we always, shoot things and release things out of order in Star Wars. That is just
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things in the trilogy that should have mentioned stuff in the prequels that just they couldn't. So
I know Thrawn is just such a big entity to me that it feels weird for there to be such a significant conflict in that time of the New Republic in Disney canon, and for it not to really come up later. That's all.
So, moving on. Luke has 2 Force visions in this book. The first Force vision, I think, is the one that would probably garner the most discussion. It's, in my opinion, one of the odder things in this book. And that is, while he's in his X-Wing, flying wingman for Han as they go after this fighter, Luke just has a strange vision of Palpatine and Exar Kun laughing at him. And it forces him to then reevaluate how much of the Force he is using. I'll be honest, I don't 100% understand the vision or what Zahn is kind of saying here. Do either of you have an interpretation?
I have an interpretation, but it's kind of flippant, so I apologize in advance. I don't think that this is a Force vision. I think Luke is having literally an anxiety attack accompanied by hallucinations. Like,
I guess the question is, what at this point in the story would give Luke an anxiety attack?
Yeah, he did just find out that, I forget if it's the Diamala or the Ashori, one of the groups does not want to play ball with him because they think that they haven't said why at this point yet, but he's been rebuffed. Like, his services have been pushed away. That's the only thing that I can think of. It's just such a straight, if it's a Force vision, and I know realistically Zahn is saying that it is a Force vision, it's just such a strange one. Like, the Force conjures up your top villains and has them laugh at you just to like put you in your place a little bit.
I have an interpretation, but it also involves spoilers for the next book, so I won't delve too much into it. But I think, to me, it ties into what he and Mara talk about of how far astray he went at times over the last decade. So, to me, it's tied into that.
Okay. But they haven't had that conversation yet.
Well, yes, but I think one of the reasons why...
The Force is throwing a flag.
Well, I think one of the reasons why Mara's comments hit so hard and so close to Luke is because he started to have these realizations himself, and the Force is helping him get to that point.
The Force is trying to guide him.
Yes. Good luck guiding him, though.
So you're right, Thomas. They do have a little bit more in-depth conversation about that in the next book, Vision of the Future. But they have a small conversation about this in this book after Mara rescues Luke from that pirate
after he lands on top of her.
Right.
Crystal's favorite scene in the book.
Yep.
Right.
Well,
I just, the different, I don't know how to say this. We're going to go on a little walk here with Aaron's consciousness, and we'll come back around. We have spoken in the past at times where Zahn seems at this time, writing in Legends, to be a bit reluctant to really work with some of the other authors. Not to say that he had an issue with what they were writing or whatever, but just he had his vision and he was sticking with his vision. But
I think it's fair to say there's one author he had issues with.
Yeah. But
let him finish his thought.
But, and I think Crystal and I have an issue with that author as well. But he does make other references in these 2 books to a lot of the things that happened in Legends. He talks about Gariel. He talks about Callista. And at one point, he talks about the Emperor Reborn. And as much as I'm not a fan of Dark Empire, wouldn't the fact that in those comics Luke falls to the dark side be more of a reason for him to pull back from the Force than just from using the Force as much as he does, than having a vision of Palpatine and Exar Kun laughing at him?
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you.
I mean, as much as I don't want to give Veach credit, because, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of Dark Empire, him falling dark is a good reason to kind of cut yourself off from using the Force that much.
It is, but I also think at that point in the EU story, there is still so much going on in the galaxy and with the conflict with the Empire, whereas right now things are very quiet and very peaceful. And I think Luke kind of feels like this is a moment where he actually can afford to step back and not worry about the galaxy like he used to. Like, he has to come in and save everyone, like he has done in how many other books on that shelf over there. He's come in and been maybe not the hero, but one of the heroes certainly. And this is a time in the galaxy where the Force is like, okay,
you have time to reflect now.
Exactly.
So reflect. I don't know. It doesn't work for me. The Force stuff in this book and the next one, but
and I will say, this is my personal opinion. That is one of the things that I think Zahn doesn't write as well as some of the other authors. I would just say in general, I don't agree with the way he interprets the Force than the way some other authors do. I think a better job.
Yeah, I think other authors definitely do a better job than Zahn does. Not that Zahn does a bad job, but it's not his strength, is what I would say.
Sure.
And I also think part of the problem with this is not Zahn's fault, or it's not any author's fault, period, even Veach or Wolverton or any other author who we have issues with.
No, it's their fault.
The fault is how the EU was written, with not a ton of communication between most of the authors, out of order, out of sync, and it leads to things being
confused,
inconsistent, confused,
and probably not the best oversight from Lucasfilm.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I appreciate about this book and the next book, you mentioned, Aaron, how like Zahn tries to reference so many other conflicts that came before, and I think it would actually be a shorter list to pick the books he didn't reference rather than the books he has referenced at this point, because he's trying to tie everything together. But tying the 90s stories together is frankly an impossible task because of how it was done.
Leia's the prime minister. Now she's not. Now she is. Now she's not. Like,
yeah, like
that alone.
You just did the Black Fleet Crisis, which have some fascinating ideas in them. But in the timeline, I forget if it's either those come out either right before or right after the New Rebellion. And in the Black Fleet Crisis, she decides, no, I will not step down. But in the New Rebellion, which is either months before or months after, I don't remember, she does willingly step down. And yeah, it's just this, there's not enough communication and consistency across the different stories and authors in the 90s. And that's to say nothing of even the comics of this time, which are...
far afield, right?
Yeah, unless it's like Stackpole writing X-Wing comics that tie into the X-Wing books, the comics of the 90s are very much doing their own thing as well.
I think there was a little line in Specter of the Past where I can't remember exactly how it's written, but Leia is sort of thinking about something, and in her thoughts she talks about the dangers that are out there with her family, and she mentions about how many times her children have, how many attempted kidnappings there have been of her children, and the way Zahn writes it, it almost sounds like a joke, like it's a little flippant. Because, I mean, we had like 4 or 5 different stories where someone's trying to kidnap the kids.
That's also going to happen in the future when we get to the Young Jedi Knight series. Like, it happens there too. Like, it's a constant struggle.
It's wild. Those children are such hot targets.
A question relating back to the original Heir to the Empire, Thrawn trilogy. When you guys read that, how close did you think Thrawn really came to defeating the New Republic? Because I'll be honest, 1991 when I read it, and then I've probably read it 5 or 6 times since then. I mean, I got the sense that Thrawn was a real threat, but not that he was like this close to defeating the entire New Republic. And I do think there are some allusions in this story where a lot of the people think that Thrawn almost, wiped the New Republic out. Did you guys get that sense?
I didn't. I got the sense that if the New Republic sat around on their hands for long enough while Thrawn got his war machine of clones and whatever going, then yeah, he could have a chance at it. But they didn't sit around and do nothing for long enough. Like you said, he was a very credible threat, but he was stopped too early for him to come this close to defeating the New Republic.
Yeah, he got closer than I think anyone had, which
sure,
is kind of wild to me to think about, given that the Emperor Reborn actually takes back Coruscant from the Republic. So to me, that's actually Palpatine's clone gets closer than Thrawn does, but no one likes to talk about that because it's just not a great story.
Well, there's 2 people on this call that don't like to talk about that. There's plenty of other people that like Dark Empire. There are, and I
have
fully
it
admit
on
that.
good authority that lots of people like Dark Empire. They're just not the majority of this call.
I have nostalgia bias where I enjoy it, but I also recognize how flawed a lot of that story is. I think for me, what it is a lot of people realize that while Thrawn didn't defeat the New Republic, he was only beaten by, frankly, a fluke of his bodyguard turning and killing him.
No, it's not just that.
Well, it's not just that.
They pulled together to destroy the Sparty cylinders and figure out his
plans. But I think people thought if he's not assassinated by Rook, I think a lot of people assumed that Thrawn would have been able to recover from that setback and keep fighting.
I think it would have been a longer and bloodier conflict.
Oh, absolutely.
But I still don't think... I just don't... Even at that time, the Empire had shrunk enough that you still just don't have the numbers.
You don't.
And you could get them with the clones eventually, but they were always, flippantly, like the plot was going to do what the plot needed to do.
Yes.
Someone was going to stop him early enough.
Yes. But I think what's happened since Thrawn's death is he's been kind of on both sides, especially in the Empire, but also in the Republic too. He's been almost deified as to what he was able to accomplish.
Exactly.
In a way that no one else has gotten even close to. And that deification is why in these 2 books, so many people are like, oh, he almost beat the Republic, or oh, he would have beaten the Republic.
They have nightmares about him.
Yeah,
he's the boogeyman.
Yeah.
Yes, we talked about Disra's plan, and I do agree it probably isn't going to work. But I did find the discussions within the New Republic itself about the Kayamasi document pretty fascinating. What did you guys think when you hear these discussions between Leia and President Gavrisum and Borsk Phalia and Han and Lando, and then the Diamala and the Ashuri, all of these different members of the New Republic, and their different opinions about what should happen if they are able to discover which Bothans were involved over the destruction of Kamos.
So I think one thing that Zahn does really well is he's showing how fragile the Republic is right now. And it also, I think, lines up well with what George shows in the prequels of how fragile the Republic is then as well. Of just like, there are always going to be disputes, and people will always look for a reason, an excuse to act on a perceived slight that happened last Saturday or happened 500 years ago. It doesn't matter when it happened, just that this slight happened. And if we can find some excuse, and whether consciously or subconsciously, we're going to act and do something about it. And it's very heartbreaking to me that this genocide people are using to dig up and settle old grievances and It's also, unfortunately, feels very realistic and very human, and that we do the exact same thing.
I will say that my first read of Specter of the Past, I did not get it with the Kamasi document and the whole Kamas thing because it happened so long ago. And Leia at one point literally says to Han, like, this might be the biggest threat that we've ever faced. And I was thinking to myself, like, really? Are you sure? But what I will say now, because I think this really comes to fruition in Vision of the Future, is that all of the threats that they are feeling and all of the conversations that they're having, they're about the Kamasi document, but they're not about the Kamasi document.
Right.
They're about all of you have this enormous government made up of so many different types of people with so many cultures and customs, and they are all just looking for a reason to fight each other.
What is the Hand of Thrawn? Did you understand what it was the first time you were reading this? Although I guess technically Spectre of the Past, you're never really told what it is in this book. It's
not
the
until
next
the second book
where it comes about. But,
yeah.
Okay. So all three of us know what it is. Can you remember the first time you were reading this, what you thought it could be?
I cannot. That was in the late 90s. Couldn't tell you.
I remember. I remember what I thought it was not. I was very certain it was not a super weapon, and I was very certain in Mara's assessment that it was not like her. It was not like an assassin or a bodyguard or something like that. But I could not puzzle out what it possibly could be, and I felt that we didn't get a lot of hints in Spectre of the Past, so I contented myself with eliminating those two possibilities and moving on.
If I remember correctly, I thought it was going to be something like some sort of disease, some sort of pestilence, something insidious that would work its way through the galaxy. I like Crystal, I didn't think it was like a big super weapon like the Death Star, but I thought it was a different kind of super weapon, almost like the Kratos virus in the X-Wing books.
Yeah, Kratos or the Blight from the High Republic.
Huh. That does seem like it would be more to Thrawn's style. Like, it is a unique way of removing pieces from the board and giving himself a more even playing field.
Yeah, it's closer to his style. I think the reason why he wouldn't, though, is just it's, as we see with the Kratos virus, it's something you can't control in the end well enough.
I don't think he would deploy it if he couldn't figure out a way to control it after his issues with controlling Sabaoth.
True.
He only has to learn a lesson once, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it would have been something that he would have as a contingency if he was dead. I think it would have. I think the Hand of Thrawn was something that he was going to use if he was still alive. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So,
especially since it was in the Wayland
warehouse
facility.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So, let's wrap up our discussion here with probably Crystal's favorite part of the book, and that is the interactions between Luke and Mara.
Such as they are.
Such as they are. Thomas, you already talked about the first, when Mara saves Luke. Well, I guess Luke kind of gets himself out, but she's there as the getaway driver. You know, she's the one who shows up. He gets out of the facility. She picks him up and, yeah, ends up on top of her in the cargo bay and decides to talk to her for 2 or 3 seconds before she asks him to get off of her. So,
yeah,
that's a little bit of a weird scene. But I think most people reading Legends from the beginning, and if we assume the beginning to be the Thrawn trilogy back in 1991, in their head, they shipped Luke and Mara. And yes, we had other girlfriends, quote unquote, for Luke in Legends in the 90s, but I think it was kind of convenient that they all got sort of moved out of the way until this part. And I think, in my opinion, Zahn saw the opportunity to put together the two people that he wanted to put together from the beginning.
So I remember I saw something somewhere online, so I don't know how true this was, of like, this came out in 97, 98, I forget exactly when, and a couple of years before this book came out, at first they wanted Callista and Luke to be together, but that the response to that wasn't fantastic, let's say. I think Hambly was like, she was chosen to, like, you know, write Luke's great love interest. The people don't love Children of the Jedi, and they're like, maybe we do someone else. And I think by the time Planet of Twilight came out, it was already known by Hambly and other authors that Luke and Mara were going to get together. It's just the story hadn't been finished by Zahn yet. So when Planet of Twilight comes out, Luke can see Callista, but there needs to be an ending and a finality to that relationship, because that's a no-go going forward. Again, I've seen bits and pieces of that online, different places, so I don't know how true all of that is, especially the timeline aspect of it. But I'm willing to believe most things. I think that fits pretty well with what we see play out in the books.
Well, I know Anderson basically said that in an interview once, that Hambly was writing Children of the Jedi while he was writing Darksaber, and the two of them were tasked with writing Luke's great love interest. But Anderson said the fans' reaction to Luke and Callista getting together at the end of Children of the Jedi, there was such backlash that Lucasfilm then told Anderson, you got to figure out a way to get Luke and Callista apart at the end of Darksaber. So there was some sort of plan. It wasn't this plan, but I still always kind of got the feeling, I don't know if there's any confirmation of this anywhere, but I always got the feeling that Zahn kind of wanted Luke and Mara to end up together.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, 100%. I got that feeling. I mean, at the time, I kind of thought it was just me and my memory of reading those books when I was like 13 and thinking like, oh, they have such great chemistry. They work so well together. Like, of course the plan is for them to get together eventually. So yeah, I could totally believe that was Zahn's plan. And from
hope might be a better word than plan.
Hope, yeah. It's not like he had so much power.
Sure.
He could make that happen in the future. But I think it's so funny that, I mean, it's not so funny that the backlash to Callisto was so intense. I'm just not surprised. That story was very weird.
Some of the Jedi was a weird book.
And on a more basic level, like, this sounds very callous, but Mara was just there first. Like, a lot of the ways that, like, even subconsciously we attach on to these characters are like, who pinged our radar earlier? And, you know, the Thrawn trilogy was such a beloved story at the time, and there's, you know, one unattached woman in that series, and there's this one unattached man, and like, what are people going to do but think that they're going to get together when they spend a lot of page time together?
Yeah. Also, one thing for Callista, for me, and I know for you as well, I didn't necessarily have an issue with Luke and Callista when she was still a Force ghost. It was Callista entering the body of one of his students that really made it a problem for me.
Like I said, it was a weird book.
Yeah.
And for people who have an issue with that, you know, Dark Empire, Luke and another one of his students. Luke.
That one was worse.
Oh, it
because
absolutely
she was, like,
was
underage.
Worse. Absolutely was worse.
But in terms of in Specter of the Past, what I realized with a sinking feeling as we arrived at this whole scene at the pirate base where Luke and Mara interact, and they do have a great interaction. I love their interaction. Mara is picking at him and then kind of regretting it. Luke is happy to see her, but then like nervous about all of these existential crises that he's been having and what her commentary could mean. I think that their conversations and their like banter with each other is always really fertile ground for like interesting conflict and interesting character development. But what I realized during that scene and as the rest of the book progressed was that it was too late. Like, so much time has elapsed in these books and no other writers have done a ton with Mara to keep building her connection with Luke after the original Thrawn trilogy. But now here we are at the end of this era, and I can tell that Zahn is going to get them together by the end of the next book, and we have no more time for build up. We have no more time for them to really like build their connection beyond she no longer wants to kill him and is kind of his ally, and so we're going to have to fast track this. And that was disappointing.
Yeah, I think there are two authors that did a little bit with Luke and Mara. Nowhere near enough, but at least did a little bit. Mm-hmm. Stackpole with iJedi, when Mara goes to train at the temple and when Corn's there. And then Alan in the Corellian trilogy. They don't have a ton of page time together, but I do think he does.
They have like a weird, awkward greeting.
I know.
Like Mara's in those books, and it's great. Like I love her just on her own, but I don't know. Like before this point where they interact at this pirate base, I don't even get the impression that they're like friends.
Well, what I also found funny is earlier in this book is both Han and Card are clearly thinking that Luke and Mara need to at least see each other
They're
again.
like, yeah, those kids really need to talk more. Let's get them together sometime. It's like, what are you talking about? Is it just because they're the only two people you know that are force sensitive?
Probably.
Right. And from kind of what we've seen in these stories, they've had what? 5 conversations over a 10-year period?
Yeah.
There's that one time, I think it's in Darksaber.
Yep, it's a Darksaber, which is actually a surprisingly good scene that Anderson wrote between
where
the
they
two
like
of
go
them.
on a joyride together.
Yeah.
And at the time that I was reading it, I was just like, what is happening? Where is the basis for this? Like no one has made the like foundation on top of the basement that Zahn built, and now we're trying to build an attic for some reason. We're missing stuff in the middle.
Yeah, I think Stackpole probably did the most in Jedi, and that was all from Corn's perspective of watching them and talking to Mara about Luke.
Yeah,
like clearly she cared a lot about him, but also knew that this was not the time and the place. Like I do know that when Stackpole was working on iJedi and Zahn was working on these two books, and they both were talking to each other. So like Stackpole was putting that in there to basically try and help Zahn out, because no one else had done very much. Before that, it was again Alan and the Corellian trilogy that had done just a little bit. And then, yeah, you're right, Anderson and Darksaber as well.
But the problem is that iJedi was already trying to fill in gaps for another thing.
Yep.
And now we're trying to fill in gaps for this too. Like, this just goes back to what we were talking about earlier about there not being a clear, like, overarching vision of this era. And this is just one of the fatalities. Like, we're just not going to get the character development and relationship development that I think is necessary for these two people, one of which wanted to murder the other originally, like in a compelled way.
Yeah, one reason why I like the New Jedi Order so much is because there was that oversight to try and keep that consistency. While not perfect, they did a much better job than the 90s. Like, this was, to me, the first time Star Wars actually had books that were consistent, for the most part, from character to character and story to story.
I'll be so excited to see
revolutionary at the time.
I'm looking forward to it.
Crystal will get there in 2035.
I've actually been told that probably we'll start reading them next year.
No, it's definitely next year.
Definitely next year, 2026. Creeping up on it.
Moving at a glacial pace.
And, you know, I mentioned the High Republic earlier. If you want a more modern take on Star Wars, of just with good oversight, the High Republic is a great thing to read right now. I just started Trials of the Jedi last night, the final book of Phase 3, and I'm like 2 chapters in, and I'm loving it so far.
Well, it's time to go. Listener, if you have something you'd like to share with me, a question, an opinion, or a comment, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or Send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at SW Legends Lounge. And don't forget to send in your favorite Star Wars character groupings. I haven't gotten one of those in a few months, and I like reading them. Crystal, Thomas, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Good discussion.
And what's coming up on the next episode of TK331?
So next up is Heirs of the Force, written by Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Buista. That will be out on August 3rd. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll be continuing our short story discussions in Tales from the Empire.
If people would like to contact you or the show, how can they do that?
You can email us at tk331podcast@gmail.com with a question or a comment. We love hearing your opinions and your feedback. You can also check us out on Twitter at tk331podcast.
And if people want to go to Lowe's and rearrange the numbers in the mailbox section to say TK331, I'm sure you guys
We would
appreciate
encourage that.
Yeah.
It's harmless. Harmless fun.
Coming up on the next episode, Crystal and Thomas and I will wrap up the Hand of Thrawn duology with Vision of the Future by Timothy Zahn. You can join us for that episode on July 25th. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Motes. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in legends.